Hi, I'm Dr. James Miller. Welcome to the Philosophy of Religion. In this course, we'll explore issues surrounding the nature of world religions, arguments for and against the existence of God, the implication of religion for ethics and science, and some approaches for experiencing the mystery of the divine. You may come to the subject of religion from your own religious viewpoint, or you may approach the topic as a skeptic. Regardless, the philosophical exploration of religion will challenge us to hone our skills of inquiry and analysis, while hopefully opening up a sense of curiosity and wonder to the human inclination to seek a creator or a transcendent experience of the supernatural. Explore the topic to deepen your faith or to test your doubt. Either one is a great place to start. So welcome to the Philosophy of Religion. Hi class, today we're going to look at a famous piece of philosophical argumentation called the Cosmological Argument. Sometimes it's called the Cosmological Argument for God, although we'll see it's a bit of a misnomer because it's neither a single argument nor is it an argument for the existence of God. Nonetheless, it's an important piece of philosophical tradition and it has a rich history behind it. So it'll be a useful tool for us to have when we consider the arguments for and against the existence of God. The reason the cosmological argument is not a singular argument is because it is actually a category of kinds of argument. There are several different cosmological arguments. It is a type of argument. The word comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. The cosmological argument, thus, is an argument from the existence or nature of the universe to something that lies behind the universe. As I said, it won't actually demonstrate to us the existence of God because the cosmological argument never even mentions God. What it suggests to us is that the universe is fundamentally dependent or secondary or contingent, that it must somehow have a cause behind it. And that should provoke us to contemplate the nature of the cause. But the argument itself tells us nothing about the cause. It only tells us something about the fundamental nature of the beginning of the universe. The category of cosmological arguments first gained tremendous significance when they sprang from the pen of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a theologian in the High Middle Ages who set out to demonstrate the existence of God. Here it's helpful to have a couple of categories. We can talk about natural theology and revealed theology. Revealed theology is the theology we get from the Bible. It's the message that we get from God when God reveals himself. Natural theology is theology that we get from studying nature and deducing what we can, or to be accurate, inducing what we can about God's nature based on the creation that God has made. It's an inductive exploration of nature to determine what might lie behind it. Aquinas set out to develop some arguments from nature towards the existence of God. As I said, he doesn't in any way prove God's existence. He simply demonstrates that the universe itself is suggestive of a creator. Thomas Aquinas is famous for having developed 5 arguments for the existence of God. The first 4 are said to be cosmological arguments. They are arguments that fit into the category of natural theology that studies the nature of the cosmos and deduces things about its nature and its creator. Let's look at those 4 arguments. Aquinas' first argument is the argument from motion. Picture a long line of dominoes, one falling into the next and knocking it over. If I asked, why did the most recent domino fall down, you might say, well, because the one in front of it knocked into it. If I say, why did that one fall down? You could again say, well, because the one in front of it knocked into it, and so on and so on. But if I were to say, how did that all begin? And you were to say, it didn't. They've just been falling down forever. The line goes back into eternity, and there is no starting point. It's hard to conceive of such a thing. In fact, it seems frankly suspicious. It seems like you're lying at that point. Intuitively, this is just an obvious point to make. And Aquinas said the same thing. Motion obviously had to have a starting point. All the world is in motion. There's motion all around us and through us. Everything that we see is in motion. But somehow, at the beginning, something had to start it all off. That's the first argument, the argument from motion back to the beginning. Aquinas' second argument is an argument of cause and effect. Every effect has a cause. Everything out there that is a result of something came from something else. From every chicken, there was an egg, and from every egg, there was a previous chicken. Back to the beginning. Aquinas would say every effect out there obviously has a cause, so the existence of the universe, all of these effects that are going on around us, can be traced back to an original cause. As you can see, the first two arguments are very similar to one another, and Aquinas doesn't mean to make a wide distinction between them. The third argument is an argument from contingency, which is an argument similar to the first two. Here you have to look at some ancient Greek philosophical concepts of necessary and contingent beings. A contingent being is something that depends for its existence on something else. Something that couldn't have caused itself, it had to be caused by something else. An easy example would be you and I. We obviously didn't cause ourselves. We came from our parents. We were caused by something else. We're contingent. We couldn't have brought ourselves to be. We are essentially dependent on a source. Then look at our parents. Are they contingent or necessary beings? Well, obviously they're contingent as well. They couldn't bring themselves into being. There was a time when they were not, so they're contingent beings as well. Aquinas would again say that this has to be traced back to an original necessary being. A necessary being, in other words, a being whose existence existed within itself. A being that did not depend on anything else for existence, something that was uncaused, was the original source of all the other contingent beings. Now this language sounds a little bit strange. We're not used to thinking about necessary and contingent beings. We think of generally, if we were to use these categories, it seems like everything around us is contingent in one way or another. Why does anything have to be necessary? Why couldn't we say the universe itself is necessary? Part of this is because Aquinas is system dependent on Aristotelian categories, which we'll get into in a minute. The fourth argument is the argument from perfection. Here, Aquinas looks at the way we conceive of things, and everything we see is relative to something else. We can say things are better and worse, or stronger and weaker. Every gradation is relative to something we're measuring it against. And yet we have this category of goodness. And goodness seems to be measured against the standard of perfection. And everything that falls short of perfection, we measure its goodness relative to the fact that it fell short. Well, Aquinas would say, obviously, perfection does not exist in the natural world. And yet we all seem to have a concept of perfection in our minds. Therefore, there must be some perfect being that creates this standard of perfection against which everything else is measured. Later, this will fuel moral arguments in which moral goodness is said to require some original source that was morally perfect. Many philosophers find qualms with this argument and with all of them. But these were Aquinas' four cosmological arguments by which he claimed to build a case for the existence of God. Whether or not you believe in those arguments, there's a modern expression of the cosmological arguments that many people, philosophers and scientists as well, find very compelling. The most popular modern version of the cosmological argument is called the Kalam Argument. The reason it sounds like an Arabic name is because it is, and that comes from the history of philosophy. Aristotle was preserved by the Muslims through the Middle Ages. Aquinas actually helped to resurrect Aristotle and merge Aristotelian philosophy with Christian philosophy. Christian philosophy had sided with Plato in the great argument between Plato and Aristotle, largely because Augustine was a Platonist. And so Christians had looked to Platonic philosophy to inform their religiosity. But Aristotle's categories had defined the sciences. If you've watched my video, Galileo versus Science, you know that the Aristotelian scientific mindset had governed the way the universe was seen. Aquinas had come to be sort of an unquestionable orthodoxy in the world of science. When Galileo said that the Earth goes around the sun rather than vice versa, he wasn't really challenging the Catholic Church. He was challenging Aristotle. And the Catholic Church only held to Aristotle because Aristotle was the defining voice in metaphysics, in the way the universe really ran and was shaped and worked. The Catholic Church might have found a biblical support for Aristotle, but it was Aristotle's name that was at stake in that debate. Aristotle liked to talk about different forms of causation, about what caused a thing to be, what formed a thing, what eventual destination a thing would have. And he named these different types of causation that directed the formation of all matter. Aquinas would pick up on that when he talks about things like unmoved movers starting the universe and contingent beings. Muslim libraries held on to the teachings of Aristotle and imported them into the Middle Ages, and Aquinas would first take up the charge of using Aristotle to make a case for God. So the Kalam argument actually came from Muslim scholars who used it to argue for the existence of God. Modern philosophers like William Lane Craig have found that a useful tool for themselves defending this version of the cosmological argument. The argument has three very simple claims, two premises and a conclusion. First, everything that comes to be has a cause. Second, the universe came to be. Therefore, conclusion, the universe has a cause. Let's look at each of these three claims in turn. First, everything that comes to be has a cause. Well, this seems just intuitively obvious. Nowhere in the universe does matter just spontaneously come to exist. In fact, some Russian scientists once attempted to make that claim and later admitted that it was only because of the theological ramifications of the alternative that they tried to defend it. But there is no known case of matter just coming to exist. In fact, everything that exists does seem to come from somewhere. In the world of physics, there seems to be a kind of determinism in which particles bounce into particles, causing the expressions of the universe throughout it till the very end. Some physicists would even say that there's a sort of predestination built into the physical nature of the universe. Although after Einstein, there is some debate about this, and physicists have loosened up on this commitment to determinism significantly. However, this premise stands independently. Unless someone can prove that something came to exist without a cause, it seems just intuitively true. Secondly, a more debated claim is the fact that the universe came to exist. Now, this is debated because historically, people didn't believe in a Big Bang. That's actually a later development in scientific theory. There was a belief that the universe had always been around, or that somehow it was fluctuating, expanding and then contracting, expanding and then contracting. However, modern cosmologists have said that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the universe had a beginning point, which we standardly refer to as the Big Bang, and that everything has exploded outwards from there. And that there's actually a movement towards entropy, that initial force that started the universe into its exploding course is unwinding, and that energy is essentially running out. And one day the universe will die a cold death. David Hilbert, the mathematician, has said that the existence of an actual infinite is nonsensical. We can talk about it theoretically. We can talk about it in terms of math. But a universe can't exist infinitely. It leads to all sorts of contradictions. Here's a simple one. Let's take the existence of numbers, of which there are an infinite amount, because we can always add one. How many odd numbers are there? Well, there's actually an infinite number of odd numbers. How many even numbers are there? Well, there's actually an infinite number of even numbers. So if you add the odd numbers and the even numbers together, you add an infinite plus an infinite to get to an infinite. Well, let's work in the other direction. Let's say you take all the numbers and subtract the even numbers from them. How much is left? Well, all the numbers are infinite, and the even numbers are infinite. When you subtract an infinite from an infinite, you're left with, well, still an infinite. What if we do it slightly differently? What if we take all the numbers and remove all the numbers less than 3 and greater than 0? What's left? Well, there's 1, 2, and 3. So if you take an infinite and subtract an infinite, you can also get 3. So to imagine infinite existing in reality leads to absurd contradictions. In fact, beginning with infinites, you can arrive at any number subtracting one amount from another. It mathematically leads to nonsense. So generally, mathematicians and philosophers will tell you there is no such thing as an actual infinite. Cosmologists wrestle with astronomical evidence that point towards a beginning point in the universe. They can't account for why the universe came to be or why it came about at all. But all of them now acknowledge that there is a starting point to the chain of events that are the events of the world. Astrophysicist Paul Davies says that cosmologists must deal with the fact that creation has to be creation ex nihilo. that before the beginning of the universe, there was not a random grouping of matter that somehow took shape, but in fact, there was literally nothing at all. The universe didn't come to be in empty space. There was literally not even any empty space. Astrophysicist Alexander Vilenkin has said, "Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of an infinite universe. They now must deal with the fact that the universe had a beginning." And Anthony Kinney at Oxford has said that an atheist is now stuck with the fact that the universe came to exist from nothing and by nothing. That's the state of modern cosmology, a fascinating field of study in which people are trying to get back to the origins and speculate about how the universe might have come to be, especially if we take God out of the equation and talk about what, in terms of physics, could have happened to bring matter out of nothing. That field of study is still doing raw speculation today about things that scientists have never had answers to before. But we do know some things about the nature of the universe today that tells us about the beginning. In the 1920s, some research was going on right around the time that Albert Einstein was writing. Two scientists, Friedman and Lemaitre, suggested that the universe was expanding outwards. And actually in 1929, Hubble first measured the red shift, which showed that stars were expanding outwards from a finite point in the past from which everything began. From then on, the scientific community has almost entirely committed itself to a Big Bang, an origin point, which, from the atheist perspective, seems to have just come about spontaneously. So, as to the second claim, the universe came to exist, it seems like the overwhelming bulk of scientific evidence supports that claim. So, if everything that came to exist has a cause, and the universe came to exist, then the only valid conclusion is the universe had a cause. And that's the cosmological argument. Now, it's important to realize what the cosmological argument has not said. It has not said anything about God at all. It has not made any claim that there's a benevolent being that started everything up in love. In fact, arguing to God from the cosmological argument takes an irrational leap to which a philosopher is not entitled. To say that the universe had a cause doesn't say that the cause is intelligent. It could have been just a force or a movement. The word God has way too much baggage to quickly assign that to the cause of the universe. All we know is that something must have caused the universe. The question then becomes what? But the cosmological argument cannot answer that question for us. It does, however, perhaps serve as a piece of evidence in the weighing of claims about God's existence. If God did exist, we would expect there to be a creation point traced to him. If the universe were fluctuating and had always been around, well, that would kind of take the idea of a creator God off the table. So we would expect there to be a creation point if there were a God. So the cosmological argument only points us in the direction of going and looking for what that cause might be. Nonetheless, that has been a helpful philosophical tool for Christians and theologians throughout history, looking to point people towards the God who made them. I'll leave that to you to speculate about. If you find it particularly compelling or not so much, leave a comment. Hope that's helpful. God bless you.